is honestly dull, but only to modern standards. Don't get me wrong. It's a great movie with a truthful message. I wish that I had seen this movie when I was younger. This video will have spoilers. It's from 1952. What do you expect? This is also not a review per se, but it's more about some of the film's meaning and how, as a whole, it affected me. To put it simply, the protagonist, Kanji Watanabe, learns he has stomach cancer and realizes that he has never really lived in the 20 years since his wife passed away. He then goes to learn about what it means to actually live, hence the title Ikiru, which means to live in English. So anyways, this takes a couple of tries to figure out. He goes from learning that indulging in pleasures is fun but not fulfilling. Eventually, Watanabe finally learns that fulfillment and making other people's lives better is living. This is a movie that has several perspectives. It has a third-person omniscient narrator who only appears a few times in the movie to tell us exactly what's going on with these characters, whether or not they know it themselves. For example, the movie begins by telling us that the protagonist, Watanabe, has a stomach cancer that even he's not aware of, but he notices that he's a little sick and doesn't know exactly why yet. For the majority of the movie, it's obviously shot with Watanabe's point of view of the events. It does switch to his son a few times to show us what he's like. He's a greedy and ungrateful son who is only after his father's money. He has no idea what's going on with his father. His father had tried to tell him, but the son didn't care to listen. He just thought his dad was like being some burden or whatever. He just didn't care about his father to listen, that's all. In the third act, it switches to Watanabe's co-workers and people of different bureaucratic departments, and they recall their interactions with Watanabe to figure out who should receive credit for the new park that was formerly a mosquito-infested cesspool. At times, Ikiru feels dragged out, but the slow nature has a purpose. Often we see Watanabe slack-jawed, hunched over, and staring at people before he musters up the courage to speak. This acting choice is effective because it's entirely believable that he is sick and has stomach cancer, and in general, that's just his personality. Although this slows down the movie considerably, it makes sense. It could also be Watanabe's personality as well, because he was not living before he became sick. He was just taking his time. He wasn't out there living and being purposeful. Because sometimes if you don't have a purpose, you're just lollygagging through life. This could be someone that's slowly coming back to life from being a figurative dead man walking. Kurosawa was definitely ahead of his time by having people talk about Watanabe during his funeral to understand what kind of legacy he left behind. Life isn't as crystal clear as it should be, and that's especially so in regards to death. It's hard to determine someone's state of mind before they die, which is what Watanabe's co-workers and people from other bureaucratic departments try to figure out. They're so stuck on who should receive credit and a dedication for the park, and they keep bouncing around which department and which person should get it. It makes them so flabbergasted that Watanabe went out of his way to work around the bureaucracy in order to get the cesspool cleaned up and the park built. This third act demonstrates what people do to remember the deceased. They remember them in a certain way, and it might not be the way that they intended. They don't interpret his actions thinking that he's a wholehearted person because they don't believe that Watanabe could change his outlook and personality drastically all of a sudden. But in the end, they finally get to a shared conclusion after drinking a lot, and they realize that he knew that he was going to die, which in turn inspires them to all change their ways from being bureaucratic zombies into people that want to make a difference. He previously believed that indulging in life's pleasures gave him fulfillment after spending a night in the town with a novelist. Then he tries this approach with the young female subordinate, but she grows tired of shopping, eating, and hanging out with him because she has a life of her own. It's also fairly creepy to hang around with a 50 or 60-year-old widowed man. The scene between her and Watanabe at the restaurant was filled with a lot of tension. I did not find myself myself much on Watanabe's side. He was a bit forward because he doesn't straight out say what his problems are. He's a hard man to read. This is where the message of finding a purpose in your work or activities comes into play. It's not all about burning all your money and having fun, because that gets boring. There has to be some payoff for work, which is why vacations once in a while feel so gratifying. The film's message is highly important. There are periods of our lives where things feel automatic and you're just going through the motions. When death is knocking on the door, one's perspective changes and a realization of doing everything one can do to ensure a fulfilling life becomes the final goal. Do things that you like or do things for others. Don't stay on one easy trek because that leads to complacency. Unfortunately, this message is hard to stick with, as evidenced by the drunken pact that people made at Watanabe's funeral because they're not as close to death. This movie feels small instead of vast. It takes place in Tokyo, which makes sense due to being one of the largest cities by population in the world. Kurosawa doesn't hide any illusions about how crowded it could be at times and portrays it accurately. The nightlife scene looks as crazy as it could be. I liked how the flashback scenes had a dreamlike quality to them. They didn't feel like they actually happened despite being plausible memories. They looked like personal mild nightmares, like when Watanabe was being lectured by his brother that his son wouldn't treat him with the same love and respect as he got older, and the one where Watanabe was watching his son Mitsuo get tagged out embarrassingly at a baseball game, and another one where Watanabe wasn't there for his son as he went under surgery for appendicitis. Watanabe was not the same after his wife passed away, and he forgot how to live and move on without her. We see Watanabe's reaction before he reflects back, and afterwards he has a sullen face and a slumped over body. He felt as if he was taking up space for the last 20 years instead of owning it. A recurring song, Gondola no Uta, or the Life is Brief song, summarizes how one must do things before it's too late. It's supposed to be a really old love song, like how about you should fall in love quickly before it's too late, but the way that Watanabe sings the song makes it appear like a song for lamenting a wasted life. It really sounds like he's trudging along to sing the song. It's like he could die at any second singing it with his fairly deep voice. Ikiru is one of Kurosawa's several classics, and it contains a profound message of how to live. Having a short-term expiration date motivated the protagonist to learn how to live, and his death motivated his co-workers and other bureaucrats to fight the bureaucracy and live as well after they figured out that he was indeed the key figure of the cesspool conversion into a park project. They did not follow through, which also demonstrates that it's hard to change from being complacent. It actually takes cancer or drastic measures to open people's eyes. Otherwise, a pact is just an empty gesture. I was actually inspired by this movie, but its message is fading away from me, which is practically the point that Kurosawa displays at the end. If it doesn't affect you personally, the impact won't be as profound. It's totally another thing to just read the synopsis and getting the message from that. You have to watch this movie. Rewatch every now and then, every time you feel like you're in a psychological rut.